some problems can be answered with just a few words, but actually at this point in your studying, it pays to review why the answer is what it is. This question's a good example of that. Using the supplier positioning and preferencing models. Now, these are two different models, speaking of reviewing. You identify that the goods to be purchased fall within the strategic critical core quadrants of the models. What sort of contract should you consider entering into? Okay, this is a good example of, it's only going to take us 2 or 3 words to actually answer that question, but wait a minute, what are we supposed to form that answer based on? Little review. Supplier positioning and supplier preferencing are two grids. They're two classification schemes for categorizing purchasing. Supplier positioning invites you to think about your purchasing first in terms of its expense. Annual expense, I'll just write expense. Whether it's a lot or a little, I wrote low and high. Except wait a minute, you know, you're thinking about your purchasing of something, there's something else that you're supposed to consider simultaneously, and that's your risk. The vulnerability of the supply. Is it really critical? Or is the risk low? This that you want to purchase, can you pretty much get it anywhere? Now, anytime you have two things you have to consider at the same time in order to categorize something, you have a grid. Because one might be low and one might be higher. They both might be higher, they both might be low. All right? This particular quadrant, strategic, critical, I'm just pointing out the upper right-hand quadrant. That's where, oh, you spend a lot on something and the risk is high. You really, really need it and you can't just get it anywhere, so on and so forth. Right, you would fall within that category, right? High and high. Now, as opposed to, it says supplier positioning and supplier preferencing. Supplier preferencing is a classification scheme, preferencing. But it's a scheme for how your supplier would see you. First, in terms of the value of your business. I mean, do you look like you'd be a big client or a little client to them? Well, that could vary, you know, so I'm just going to write low and high, right? That's the first thing that they would consider. Except, wait a minute, there's another factor because it's going to turn out to be another grid. The other factor is the attractiveness of your account, other than money. You know, are you conveniently located to them, or are you far away? That would make you a more or a less attractive account. Whatever is actually relevant in this situation. See how now we have another 4-box model? Because maybe one is high with a more attractive account or less attractive account and the value of the business is low, right? Here's a classification scheme based on answers to that. The upper right-hand quadrant, as this question says, I'll refer to as core, right? This, you know, what do we mean by core? This is a situation in which the value of your business is very high to the supplier. You'd be like a really good client, and you know, it's higher up. Simultaneously, you'd also be a really attractive account, like you're very convenient to them or something like that. They would consider you core to the business. Now, what the question is saying is that for some purchasing decision, you've decided that the category in who you're looking at both fall solidly in that area. What's this supposed to mean, right? You know, based on that diagnosis, so to speak, what do you do with that information? All right, yeah, you can actually answer this question in a few words. What sort of contract should you consider entering? That's what the quadrants are indicating. If the category falls in the upper right-hand quadrant, core, strategic, critical, long-term partnership. That's the call. That is the type of contract that you should pursue. That's what the use of the model is. Oh, now, the second question also concerns purchasing. You are recently appointed purchasing manager who is overseeing terms and conditions for a contract of an important key international purchase with a UN country. What rules should you be particularly aware of and why? Oh, this question is similar too in that we can just answer it with a phrase and it's done. It's answered. Although it pays to pay attention to, and it does ask why. Okay, first off, the key to answering this question, right? You're purchasing manager and you're going to make an international purchase with one of 76 UN countries who have signed on to what rules should you be particularly aware of? The UN Convention. It's a set of rules on contracts for international sale of goods. That's its long name. Sometimes abbreviated. See what I wrote there? CISG. Oh, okay. You say, all right, fine. I should be particularly aware of, that's a big document. It's a set of rules governing international transactions. Why should I be particularly aware of it? Because it applies automatically. Unless you say otherwise in your contract. That's the big reason why. Applies automatically unless specified otherwise. In contract. This detailed document contains a set of rules describing international transactions, and it's binding on your contract unless you say specifically this part's not or this part's not. So that's why you should be aware of it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it would be very much in your interest to be aware of exactly what it says, because unless, again, you specify otherwise, you're going to need to obey those rules.